Wow, China's century of humiliation.
100 Years of National Disgrace is a term used among the Sinosphere to describe the period in Chinese history, beginning with the First Opium War, 1839 to 1842, and ending in 1945 with China, then the Republic of China, emerging out of the Second World War as one of the Big Four and established as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, or alternately, ending in 1949 with the founding of He People's Republic of China, which is considered by many today to be a genuine great power, even a potential superpower.
Hello, what do you want?
I want to pass.
No, not allowed, I'm afraid.
And that?
You're the wrong color, so beat it.
Hey you, come here. You were wanting to get in here. No. Tell you what. There's only one thing you need to do. Pretend you're a dog and I'll take you in.
Europeans should be very, very careful dealing with China. Why? History. The Chinese remember exactly, with great precision, everything that happened in the century of humiliation, which, by the way, they have for the last 30, 40 years actually suppressed because they didn't want to have that trouble, China's relations with Europe. But if the Europeans start pushing China around, the Chinese will bring out the history and say, when we were weak, you didn't come and save our human rights. You put up a sign in the Shanghai park saying, no dogs and Chinese allowed in this park. Europeans have forgotten that. Chinese remember that. And when all this history surfaces, right, and I can tell you that what actually sparked the revival of China was something that also happened 100 years ago, right? When, after Germany lost World War I, and China had sent, I don't have the exact figures, 400,000 to 500,000 Chinese to help the Allies in their effort against Germany. At the end of World War I, the Chinese said, we helped you so much. When we defeat Germany, the German concessions in Shandong must go back to China, since China fought with the Allies against Germany. Instead, the Allies gave it to Japan. And that started the great revival of China, because the Chinese said, this is so humiliating. We cannot accept this. Right? How many Germans, how many Europeans remember this? The Chinese, every Chinese knows this. So if you don't know the history of what Europe did to China from roughly 1842 to 1949, then you are at a great disadvantage in dealing with China.
So I guess we need to better educate ourselves and our children. If I look at German history books nowadays, you read maybe a lot about the Roman Empire and others, but there's a few pages on China, and I think that's not good enough anymore. Because obviously history teaches us much more, and you just gave us a very good example.
Europeans should be very, very careful dealing with China. Why? History.
The way the Americans dominate. The Chinese understand full well what happens when you're weak in the international system. They call it the century of national humiliation. It lasted from the late 1840s to the late 1940s. As most of you know, I'm sure, China was very weak during that 100-year period. And you know what happened to them when they were very weak? The other great powers in the system, including the United States of America, preyed upon them. They were victimized at every turn. The Chinese understand full well, if you want to survive in the international system, you want to be really powerful. Indeed, you want to imitate the United States. You want to dominate Asia the way the Americans dominate the Western Hemisphere. This is what my theory tells you. It's what the Americans did, and it's what the Chinese are doing. They want to dominate Europe. If the Chinese want to get Taiwan back, they want to control the South China Sea, they want to control the East China Sea, they want those rocks back in the East China Sea. There's one simple way to do it. Get the Americans out of East Asia and make sure they are the most powerful state in the system. So that's what they're doing. The Chinese understand full well what happens when you're weak in the international system. They call it the century of national humiliation. It lasted from the late 1840s to the late 1940s. As most of you know, I'm sure, China was very weak during that 100-year period.
Were there? Approximately 83 dynasties in 500. How many Chinese dynasties were there? Approximately 83 dynasties and 559 emperors in the ancient history of China. The Zhao? I don't know. The Zhao dynasty was the longest ruling Chinese dynasty, which lasted from 1122 to 255 BC. How many Chinese dynasties were there? Approximately 83 dynasties and 559 emperors in the ancient history of China. The Zhao?
Concerned about the military exercises. So I saw some Westerners are concerned about the military exercises from China. 100 years ago, China experienced the century of humiliation by the West and Japan. That's why it sends a clear warning that China has no interest to invade another country, but it is ready to crush anyone who dare to touch it again. So I saw some Westerners.
The age of China was cut up and carved up by the imperial powers in the 19th century. Britain was going in there and killing people to sell their opium. And we think about the 19th century and the 20th century as the age of British hegemony, the age of American hegemony. Maybe we call that Pax Americana, the American peace, or Pax Britannica, the British peace. China has a name for that century too. They call it the age of humiliation. They are done with the age of humiliation. In Xi Jinping's recent speech to the Party Congress, he explicitly stated, the age of humiliation is over. And when we talk about how Deng Xiaoping is talking about biding our time, it is now time. China was cut up and carved up by the imperial powers in the 19th century. Britain was going in there and killing people to sell their opium. And we think about the 19th century and the 20th century as the age.
A shipwreck worth $300 billion was found in the China Sea. but all of a sudden 2 nations claimed to own it. The UK helped China in taking the precious items on the shipwreck out and later claimed that it owns a share. But after the discovery of the ship, a dispute between China and the UK started. The British consider this ship as their property without any evidence. But to find out which nation this ship belongs to, one must know the mystery behind it. China wanted to take this shipwreck out, but at that time China's technology was not sufficient to take the goods out of the sea. China needed someone's help, and it asked the UK to help China. The UK's technology was good enough to help. China spends a lot of money on the UK's team. The entire process cost a lot of money, and more than 400 million yuan were spent on the UK team. China kept saying that the shipwreck belonged to them, but no one was ready to hear it. So the question remains, which nation did this shipwreck belong? There is much evidence that proves that the shipwreck was China's property. Firstly, the ship sank in 1100 to 1200, while the East India Company was established in 1600. That means there is no way the ship was carrying items belonging to an East India Company. The time of the incident proves that the UK does not deserve a share in the shipwreck, and for the efforts it made to take the items out, they were paid by China. At that time, no one was supporting China. In simple words, China had no power to stop the UK from stealing its property. Even if China had the evidence to prove that the shipwreck belonged to China, it was still not able to get it. Secondly, the items that the ship was carrying were made in China. Many artifacts belong to Chinese culture. That means the ship was traveling from China. It was originally China's property. The stuff that the UK sold was also sold as China's rare and old cultural items, but the money went into the UK's pocket. Apart from gold and silver, all the items belonged to Chinese culture, and the UK knew it very well. But again, due to its power, it easily snatched these items from China without anyone questioning. Lastly, the ship's anti-corrosion property tells a lot about its origin. In ancient times, many nations used to trade goods, but China's trade system was better than anyone else's. It had especially made routes for trade, and the entire world was using those routes. China is known for its trade, and making goods is not new. It has followed the legacy over centuries. The reason why it still relies on trade is because of its history. In ancient times, the people of China were as hardworking as they are now. And China especially used to make ships that were anti-corrosion. The ships used special metals that do not decay in water, and only China could make these sorts of ships. The shipwreck found in the China Sea also had the same properties. The ship can only be made in China, and this proves that the ship was traveling from China. The items as well as the ship belonged to China, and it was also found in the China Sea, so there is no way the UK owns any share in the shipwreck. But the question is, why did the UK steal this shipwreck from China? The UK not only earned a lot of money from the ship, but they also earned the title of being the world's best treasure hunters, even if they were hired to do it. This highlights the unfair use of power as well as the act of stealing other nations' artifacts. In the 1980s, China was struggling. It was working on itself to become what it is now. It has no power to stop the UK from stealing its items. The West has always used its power over countries, especially China. Many times China was attacked and was left ruined. The hardworking people of China rebuilt it again and again. China has always been a place of treasure, thus a favorite Western spot to attack. And the West was known for its loot. If you are thinking that China was the only target of the powerful nations, then you are wrong. Many nations are affected by the loot, and in some ways some nations still feel suppressed. If you have ever studied history, then you know how powerful nations used to force other nations. The poor nations were not able to do anything. And even in 1980, just around 4 decades back, it was still the case. The unfair use of power was still there. And if you look at China today, you will understand why China is working on changing the world order. China's history makes it easy to understand why China wants to help the powerless and why it does not support the powerful unfairly. China knows exactly how the powerful nations use their power against the poor, and it is not letting it happen now. The West has stolen many pieces related to one's history. There are still many artifacts that are originally from other nations, but are sitting in Western museums. More than depicting history, these pieces tell about the loot of Western nations. It tells how unfortunate some nations have been in the past, and present conditions make a lot of sense. All the nations aligning with China to change the world order and keeping their distance from the West make complete sense. Since the incident, China has never worked with Western countries on exploring any ancient goods. It has improved its technology. And today, China is saving its ancient artifacts with reaction if your country finds a treasure worth $300 billion. A shipwreck worth...
Hey, hello friends, we come to the end already. Have you subscribed yet? Yes, press the subscribe button and the like button and the share button. Thank you and have a nice day.